Good afternoon, Society for Range Management and other participants. Welcome to the Rangeland Technology and Equipment Council workshop titled Big Sagebrush Restoration, Status at the Start of a New Decade. This meeting is being recorded. And so please make sure your cameras are off. Everyone comes in muted, but if you can make sure your camera's off, that's great. I'm Jamie Montblanc, and I will be your moderator today, along with Corey Gucker. Both of us are from the Great Basin Fire Science Exchange. And we'll begin with a welcome and overview, followed by presentations, and then we have nearly almost an hour for questions and discussion at the end. We'll only take questions after presentations if time allows. For the most part, we'll take the questions at the end of all presentations. And if you have questions, please type them into the chat box and we'll take them in the order that we receive them. All right, so welcome, M.Pellant. Please tell us what we're going to hear today.
Okay. Let's get this set up here and show you my screen, hopefully. Is that showing up okay, Jenny?
I don't see your screen yet.
Okay. How's that?
I still don't see it.
Okay. Well, yeah, I am stuck in a loop.
So if you click share and it opens up the windows, and then one of the windows should be your presentation, and you click on it and then click share again.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'll try that one more time. And if that doesn't work.
Ah, it looks like something's happening now.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
We can get up the presentation now.
We're seeing your slide and your notes. We'll like the next slide screen.
Yeah, I'm not able to run this from my computer.
Oh, strange.
Okay. I'm just going to leave it here and get going because we have a lot to cover. So yeah, welcome everyone. The Rangeland Technology Equipment Council. My name is M.Pellant. I'm a retired BLM ecologist and kind of been an ad hoc meeting arranger for the RTEC session for a number of years. What we want to do today is kind of we have this divided into two segments, the workshop presentations, the discussions. We have time at the end, as Jenny mentioned. At the end, we also, for those of you that are interested, want to have our RTEC business meeting, we call it. The one big thing we want to address is the 2022 workshop in Albuquerque, kind of the topic and leads for that. So please stay involved and participate in that meeting if you're interested. And then Corey's going to talk about the revegetation catalog next. So I'm just going to do a quick overview. Hey, Jenny, can you see any slides at all?
Yeah, we see your slides. We just see the main slide and then the next slide both together, but that's fine.
Okay, I just a little bit on the background of RTEC. It has some pretty important and historical roots going back to 1946 with a lot of the degradation on lands, on issues in the Western United States. And it was set up as a range seeding committee back then, and with the objective of addressing this land degradation issues. Later, it became known as a Vegetation Rehabilitation Equipment Workshop, and then transitioned to RTEC today. And kind of the claim to fame early on was this, the Rangeland Seeding Committee basically come up with the design of the rangeland drill. It went into commercial production, and it's still in use today. And just a quick note, what our goal is promoting the wise use and improvement of rangelands through functions of equipment development and application of innovative technology. We have several focus areas within this. Whoops. Today, we're addressing 3 of them: site preparation, seeding, plant materials, seedbed ecology. So we vary from RTEC workshop to RTEC workshop in terms of what we focus on. I will point out we do have a website with information on RTEC, so I encourage you to visit that. And I am going to just close by one of my favorite sayings: we're confronted by insurmountable opportunities. And I just ask you to join us in working towards finding solutions in some of these insurmountable opportunities through RTEC. So with that, I will get out and we'll move over and let Corey talk to you about the revegetation catalog. Sorry, Corey, am I?
You can, if you stop sharing.
Okay, there it's up now. All right, there you go.
There you go. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mike, for letting me insert myself into your agenda. I just wanted to give a brief update on the improvements and updates we've made to the revegetation equipment catalog through the efforts of myself at the Great Basin Fire Science Exchange, Keith McCallum at the Society for Ecological Restoration, and Nancy Shaw at the U.S. Forest Service. We have transferred all of the original content of the original revegetation equipment catalog. Harold Wiedemann's revegetation equipment catalog is now on a new website. And the URL of this website is different than the one that you saw in the agenda. And I will share with you that URL, and I'll bring up the website here in a second. As we were transferring to a new website, in that process, we also updated some of the organization. We've cleaned up all the internal and external old links. We've updated all of the vendor contact information. It's now current, and you can click directly to a vendor from any piece of equipment that we have on there. We're also currently, well, I should say, Keith and Nancy are undergoing a big push to find updated photos. We've contacted all the vendors and solicited photos from them, and we're also, well, that's part of why I'm here. We're going to solicit photos from you, anyone that we can find, updated photos, high quality photos is something we're working on now. And although there's a few glitches that remain, the website is fully operational. And like I said, the content is there. So let's just take a look. Share my screen. Okay, as you can see, it's a little plain at the moment, but everything is here. We have a nice menu option, more pictures. And you can see, as you scroll through here, you can get to any of these sources and click on any of these to get more information. But we still, there's still a lot of work to be done. And that's part of my being here today and talking about this is we're really requesting some of your input here for what is some of the new equipment that we need to have on the site. I've mentioned the photos. If you have, especially we're looking for anything that's in a rangeland setting or working with native seed, something that we all recognize. The other thing, we don't have a lot of references, and we know that there's more information out there that we could be directing the user to. So any of that I will take. We're also hoping to find experts who are willing to review some of the content in these, well, we called them chapters originally, but in any of the pieces of equipment.
Corey, sorry to bust in, but it's you're at time too. Just to let
Okay.
you know.
The other thing we need is funding to keep Keith going and to keep this project moving and advancing. So I'm going to put in the URL for this new website and my contact information. And please let me know if you can have some ideas and want to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. All right, Danny Summers, if you would introduce yourself. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Sorry about that.
It's all right.
So my name is Danny Summers. I work for the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, and I'm the Habitat Restoration Coordinator for the division. And my co-authors, Kevin Gunnell and Melissa Landine, also work with me here at the Great Basin Research Center in Ephraim, Utah. We're going to be talking about some work that we've been doing for a number of years now on trying to improve the establishment of sagebrush, looking at timing and seeding of seeding sagebrush. So a little bit about us. At the Great Basin Research Center, we kind of have our hands in a lot of different areas. We do research on plant materials and habitat restoration techniques, and also we provide seed and restoration equipment for the Utah Watershed Restoration Initiative, which restores over 100,000 acres of wildlands across the state of Utah every year. We provide seed for all of our partners, which include federal and state and private entities, with the BLM being a big part of that. And we also have a monitoring program here at our facility where we monitor over 600 points across the state that are important wildlife habitat. And so that kind of, all of these different things, we get to work with the practitioners, do some research, and also look at what's going on the landscape as things are changing and projects are going on. So a number of years ago, we had a bit of a disagreement with some of our partners on how much sagebrush to be putting into seed mixes and how we thought we needed to be putting more out there because we had the feeling that we weren't seeing the success that we wanted. Others felt like they didn't want it to become too overrun with sagebrush. But as it's been noted in numerous places, and I like this from Pike, he noted that most studies of management scale restoration of big sagebrush have found that 1 to 2 decades post-treatment, the sagebrush cover tends to be low or absent, or did not differ from the unseeded areas, especially in the areas of low annual precipitation. So with our own monitoring, we've seen that similar results where we've put sagebrush out there after fires and got very little success seeding. And so one of the things we want to do is increase our rates to try to improve that and look at other methods of improving our success seeding sagebrush. We looked at a bunch of our own monitoring plots, about 68 plots, and still after multiple times reading these sites, most of them had less than 1% cover of sagebrush. And so we wanted to look at what are some of the things that are limiting our success? What are the things we can improve? And so what about seeding techniques and looking at seeding rates? That was one of the big questions we had with one of our partners. Should we be doing it at a different time? What type of methods? What also using the appropriate source? Is there a way to better verify what's on a tag when you get a bag of seed? And we also know that sagebrush is difficult to establish just with the episodic nature of establishing it, and that has been covered a lot, and it was in the drought symposium this morning as well. A little bit about the biology of big sagebrush seed, if you're not familiar. They're very small seeds. You can have 1 to 2 million seeds per pound. they're produced late in the season, so they're usually collected in November. By the time vendors clean it and condition it, you don't get the seed until January. And the shelf life is short. They need to be stored in cold and dehumidified conditions. It's usually is also sold in low purities, like 20 to 30% pure. And there's little to no no life in seed bank after a fire for a big sagebrush. So we looked at some of the traditional recommendations that are out there on seeding practices. So in this one from Stevens and Madsen, it says aerial seeding sagebrush on snow has been proven to be highly successful. And so they advise to delay seeding until there's a blanket of snow. In the Great Basin Fact Sheet series, it says January is generally the best month to aerially seed. And traditionally, this is what's been done. And I think that could also be an artifact of that's when you get the seed from the vendor is in January. It's not really available before then unless you're storing it. In the BLM ESR handbook, it says that, you know, seeding rates should not be higher than is proven effective, and they use an example of only 0.2 PLS pounds per acre for Wyoming big sagebrush. We examined the literature of what other recommendations are out there for seeding rates, and generally speaking, most of the rates are between about 0.06 and 0.12 PLS pounds per acre. And with one exception was a mineland reclamation situation there on the bottom, the last row. So we've for a number of years have tried to do some various studies in establishing sagebrush. It's important to our agency. In 2011, we did a project where we were using a Mazapic to control cheatgrass and tried to establish sagebrush. That was a failure for us. And then after the talks with our partners, we tried to do some studies on rates on a couple of fires in 2013, and the one plant picture there is, I think, the only plant we got. And then again, so we decided to bring it closer to our home, to our facility here, and put it on our farm and have them be able to control more of the factors. And we applied various rates and a couple different application dates and saw no success there. So then we decided to kind of expand it and kind of go all out, expanding this timing and seed rate trial. And so we did this at 2 locations beginning in 2015, here in Ephraim at our farm, and then Fountain Green, which is about 25 miles from here, both in farm conditions. And so we tested 12 different rates, all the way from 0.1 PLS pounds all the way up to 5 PLS pounds, way above what's ever been recommended. And then we used 10 different seeding dates. So we would seed every 2 weeks throughout the winter, beginning in November all the way through March for the first year in 2015-16. And then we moved that forward a little bit into October through February. So you're seeding it every 2 weeks throughout the winter. The study was done using meter square plots and using rice hulls as a carrier to spread the seed out across the plot. We also wanted to look at a roller packer. There's some work out there that's shown if you can press the seed into the soil, you can have better success. And so with the treatments prior to any snow, we've had an additional roller packing treatment. So in summary, we know that climate and weather make a big difference on results, and that could have played a big part into some of our failures earlier, of course. But so in the past 5 years, we've had various results. So we've had the first year we had really good precipitation and really robust results. And in the next year, we saw good germination, but in the spring, we believe a late freeze killed many of our seedlings, and so we didn't have much data. In 2017 and 18 was a really poor winter and very dry, and really we had no data for that year. And then 2018-19, again, we had good results similar to 15 and 16. And this past year we had a pretty good winter, but the spring was very dry, and we had fewer plants this time, which kind of illustrates the episodic nature of sagebrush. But it was definitely good after failing to be able to have some results and to be able to see some plants come up. And so examining some of the seeding rates, this graph is, we've taken and equalized all of the rates and looked at the percent of seeds that became seedlings. So in 2016, for all of these various rates here across the x-axis, we had about 1.5% of those seeds that turned into seedlings. So it didn't really matter what rate you're seeding at. I mean, it makes pretty logical sense. The more the seed you put out, the more plants you get. In 2017, it's kind of the same pattern, but that was when we had a lot of plants die. And then 2019 had a little bit better success, up around 2 to 2.5% of the seeds turned to seedlings. Seeding day, this is where some of our really interesting observations come from. So this is at the Fountain Green study site. And we have the last 4 years, excluding 2018, where we didn't have any data. And in blue here, we have the amount of snow that was on the ground for each seeding date. So really the pattern to see here is in the fall, prior to our persistent snowfall, which usually comes about the first part of December, we've had much higher establishment or emergence of sagebrush seedlings. So once we get to December and persistent snow on the ground, we get much lower success of sagebrush seeding. So this goes contrary to what the general recommendations have been over the years, is to seed earlier into the fall. At our Ephraim location, we had it's a little bit of a harsher site, a little bit drier and clayer soils, but we saw a similar pattern, especially in 2016-17, where prior to snow we had some establishment, and then in the other year where we've had some data from this study location, it's a little bit more ambiguous, but the snow is less persistent there, comes and goes, but the pattern isn't quite as defined there with earlier with the fall establishment. So in discussion, our results show that the seeding rate's pretty linear with emergence. The more seed you put out, the more you get. And the current typical rates that were in the literature are also kind of typically what most of the practitioners use that acquire seed from us, using a rate. It's pretty low, 0.06 to 0.12 PLS pounds per acre. And Ott et al. In 2017 had in his study, they tested different rates where they tested the typical rate and 5 times and 10 times the typical rate. And he showed that densities at the typical rate were not significantly greater than the non-seeded controls. So that's, I think, one take-home point, and we've been trying to get out to our biologists across the state, is that seeding rates need to be increased from what's currently out there. Also, seeding earlier with getting seed onto the ground in the fall before the persistent snowfall. Ott also in that same study had better success with fall seeding than winter seeding as well. And there's also a new paper coming out from Red Anderson and the group at BYU that also showed that fall seeding was better than winter seeding. So again, this contradicts the traditional recommendations of what's been done in the past. And so this could lead to maybe some increased success. So in summary, the more you seed, the more you get. And so we need to be probably seeding more out there if sagebrush is a priority, which it is a lot with sage grouse and other restoring sage steppe habitats. Seeding in the late fall prior to snow. I didn't show any results from our roller packer. We've kind of had mixed results. We have times where it seems like it's made a difference and times where it hasn't. And it's a very episodic, highly dependent on the climatic conditions. This brought up a few other questions. If you're going to see all, it changes the logistics of what's happening out there, because seed comes to us in January, so seed's going to be needed to be stored, which we are able to do here at our warehouse with a cooler. But there also are other storage methods that need to be defined better and understand how to best store sagebrush. So it's also going to require pre-planning to have the sagebrush on hand for the next fall. Then the other question is, do you seed with the regular grass mix? Do you seed before chaining or after, if you're going to be trying to cover the rest of the seed? What does the competition from other species, how does that play a role? Technology to improve in our establishment. Dr. Madsen, who's going to be speaking later, will speak about that. And then Matt Germino spoke about this earlier this morning as well. Are we going to be able to predict the good years to establish sagebrush when it's so episodic? So want to just thank everybody who's participated in this, and if you have any questions, feel free to shoot us an email sometime, or yeah, we're excited that we've been able to have some results that were so obvious, and we've changed the way we've been doing things already here in Utah.
Thanks, Danny. All right, Matt Germino. You're up. Are you there, Matt?
Can you see my presentation?
Nope.
How about now?
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, in presentation mode?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. Hey, that was a great talk. Always learn a lot when I listen to you guys. Hope to see that work come out in publication at some point so we can cite it and use it. So the premise of my short presentation today is that we've been pretty heavily influenced, I think, in our restoration efforts in sagebrush steppe by the tools, the approaches, and the measurement rubrics from agricultural sciences. I think we all know that. And the reality is that we deal with sometimes very heterogeneous, variable landscapes that we're trying to restore. And the tenet of my presentation today, or my thesis here, is that we might be able to make some improvements by better embracing the variability and heterogeneity. I'm going to give some specific details on this, and I think like Kirk's talk and some of the other ones are going to go in further depth on some of the important factors that we really need to be leveraging. Okay, so restoration of sagebrush is challenging at best. Not only are we trying to bring plants back into a desert that has really low and variable precipitation, we are dealing with huge areas. Sometimes, if you're not familiar with these systems, sometimes these areas are 100,000 or 500,000 acres in size, just huge. And we just can't know all of the important factors, such as the vegetation present before, and especially in the years just after fire, when the plant communities are reassembling.
Matt, I'm going to jump in for a second.
Yeah.
I apologize. I didn't see it, but someone pointed out to me, your notes slide does show. I guess my window is small enough that I didn't see it. So
Okay.
it's showing your notes on the side.
Okay, so let's get a switch here.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, there we go. Thank
That's
you.
good. Well, that's good to know. I didn't even know that I had notes on the side. I'd give a better presentation if I just read those notes, whatever they are. But anyways, but here's the thing. So in these vast areas, we know that there's a tremendous amount of diversity in soil edaphic factors and biological things. I mean, the soil crusts that people like Leah Condon can tell us about, the differences in sagebrush genotypes like subtaxa that Bryce Richardson could go on about. And Mike Dunaway could tell us heaps about soil mapping units, some of which aren't even very well parameterized for these areas. And you look at these burned areas and it's just a blank template, black charred soils. But we know that there's differences in soil depth, texture, et cetera, that probably have a huge effect on sagebrush recovery. So all things considered, it's amazing that we would ever report like a seeding on a burned area as being unsuccessful or successful or mixed. The reality is that we probably need to look a little deeper and think a little bit more concisely about the variability that we expect to see and how responses match up with that predicted variability. So that's the main point of the talk. And I'm going to elaborate more on this by talking about what we've learned on the soda fire. I'll talk first about the patterns of seedling establishment, where the seedlings come up from seed. Then I'll talk a little bit about what we've learned from the patterns of outplant survival, so transplants, where we've skipped the initial germination and initial emergence stage. Okay, so different facts, some similarity in factors, but some key differences too. And then I'll talk a little bit more extensively about patterns that we're seeing across the Great Basin. Okay, so 2015 soda wildfire, about 300,000 acres on the Idaho-Oregon border, highly variable landscape that became a intensely treated and evaluated test bed for understanding if and how using adaptive management can enhance restoration success. And I owe lots of acknowledgements and recognition to dozens of people in the USGS and BLM who made this project possible. You're too numerous to listen or to list here, but you know who you are. So this heterogeneity is present in this landscape, and therefore we're able to evaluate it. It begins with soil temperature moisture classes, and this is actually one of the least variable things on this landscape. So it's kind of ironic that I'm introducing the topic with this map. If you dive down into any of the valleys that occur in these areas, you get a lot more variability in microclimates as well as edaphic factors and different kinds of community states of sagebrush steppe. So much variability. And then on top of this, we've got a lot of variability imposed by managements. So these polygons where herbicides, imazepec, were applied either in the first year after fire or the second year. And these polygons are either occurring by themselves or are dovetailed with drill seedings occurring these different years. So we're talking, you know, tens, large areas, tens to 50,000 plus acres, 180,000 acres seeded with big sagebrush. See different years there, aerial grass seedings. And then on top of all this, there were a lot of different grazing management units. So we studied this fairly intensively for each of the 5 years following fire. On each of these, some 2,000 odd sampling points here. In each point, we looked for sagebrush recovery, got on our hands and knees, and really looked closely for these tiny little sagebrush seedlings. By the way, can you see my pointer? Okay, little sagebrush seedlings. We counted them all. And we first, just so you can understand the method, the rule was you could count the density of sagebrush in a small central meter squared if you found at least 3 sagebrush. So maybe you see 3, but maybe there's actually 11. So you'd report 11 seedlings per meter squared. But if you didn't get 3, then you had to go to the next larger area. This frequency density approach, coincidentally, was proposed to us by M.Pellant during the planning of this monitoring. Worked out great, super efficient. And I will say that we had to go out, in many plots, we had to go out 18-meter radius for our search to count the density. That's 1,000 meters squared. So we're dealing with a really robust data set here. Lots of covariates were measured, plant community cover, soil properties, too many to list. So, okay, unsurprisingly, one of our most important discoveries is that there's variability in where shrubs come back on the landscape. Sagebrush does not recover like corn does. Corn grows after you seed it under a crop field. Instead, it's very patchy. And by the way, this map here shows sagebrush occupancy on a 30-meter pixel basis. And this is actually a gross underestimate or underrepresentation of the true patchiness on the landscape. But you can still see some important patterns here. Like number one, on the left here, Oregon did not seed sagebrush. On the right, Idaho did. So lighter colors, more sagebrush. You can see lots of different management units in here that were or were not seeded or received other kinds of treatments. A lot of variability owing to topography. Right here is the edge of the salt desert. So 2,300 feet elevation compared to nearly 6,000 up in here. This is a boundary where low resistance, low resilience. Sagebrush seed was not wasted in these low degraded zones. But you can see where you did seed, you increased sagebrush by fourfold, at least in the first year after fire. So to emphasize, this is the first year after fire. A lot of variability, patchiness. Let's explore the factors generating that variability. So here what you can see, percent cover of exotic annual grasses, perennial bunch grasses, or the dark soils underneath where sagebrush occurred before fires. Those darker soils are richer in organic matter. Y-axis, probability of sagebrush present. Dotted, unseeded, so seeding hugely increased sagebrush, at least in that first year after fire. And unsurprisingly to you all, the more exotic annual grass you have, the less sagebrush. But how about perennial bunch grasses? Now, so some of us have reported data where there's a negative, maybe competitive relationship between perennial bunch grasses and sagebrush. Other studies that some of you have been involved with show more perennial bunch grasses, more sagebrush. Maybe a site that's good for bunch grasses is also good for sagebrush. Well, it makes sense to me that actually you get this hump-shaped response with a sweet spot where you don't have too much competition, but you've got good conditions that are favorable for both species. The point here is that we're able to identify a threshold in the effect of perennial bunch grasses. And that threshold is very useful for predicting where in the landscape, where within a burned area are you likely to get a patch of sagebrush. How can that be predicted from bunch grasses? Fertile islands, better soils, better sagebrush. Also, these fertile islands probably burn a little bit hotter too, creating more bare soil. So speaking of bare soil, one of the most important factors for predicting where we would get these patches of sagebrush was predicted or knowable from what's known as a petaderm. So petaderms is just simply classes of soil surfaces. These aren't mapped by NRCS or anything, but you can readily see them on the ground. Weak physical or biological crusts, rock mulch, bare grain, duff, cemented horizons. Here what you can see is in black bars, the abundance of these soil types or soil surface types on SOTA. Gray bars are how much of the, what portion of those plots had the sagebrush. We can calculate a resource selection function. These positive values here for bare grain soil and soil aggregates tell us that the young seedlings were coming up a lot more in these type of petaderms than these. You could use this to predict where you might be likely to see more emergence from your seeds within a burned area. Every burned area is going to have all those kinds of petaderms, probably. Well, how about 5 years down the road? That's what we really care about, right? Now, petaderms don't really seem to matter too much. Instead, soil mapping units, soil taxonomic classes that are available in the NRCS soil maps really counted. These are gezerols, for example, haplargids that don't have strong impermeable layers in them, strongly favored by sagebrush. Seedings, obviously, I mentioned that already. Still 5 years down the road, where you seeded, you got more sagebrush. where you co-applied treatments of drill seeding perennial grasses or hit the plots with a masopic to reduce exotic annual grasses, beneficial. And then unsurprisingly, hot sites, ones that have burned too many times in the past, areas, really cold winter temperatures have some inhibition, and some soil types, negative effects. All of this helps explain the variability within the burned area.
You got about 2 minutes.
Great, thanks. Another major factor was where the seeds came from. Okay, many different seed sources. Some of them were winners and some losers. This created a lot of patchiness in sagebrush abundances, and it was due to the climate transfer differences. Okay, so this, let's tell you what this shows. Seeds that came from relatively drier and relatively warmer areas did better, those seed lots. 5 years down the road, those patterns seem to change a little bit. One thing that didn't change is the difference between seed source and seeding site of how continental the climate is. This appears to be a strong selective feature. If you know this for your seed sources, you can predict patchiness. We also see similar patchiness for outplants. Soil types, super important right off the bat, as well as all these same factors that we showed for seeds. Okay, now these patterns are more or less corroborated when we look across the Great Basin over many, many different sites. And I don't know, the details in here aren't that important, but the density, cover, and height of sagebrush years to sometimes decades after seedings can be pretty well predicted by pediderm class, soil texture, and some of the other variables. Point is we can map this out. I'll point to this talk that I gave earlier today. You could find it. This shows us that variability in time we can now understand. We know that these subtle differences in soil moisture and temperature can be used to predict where you're likely to have sagebrush in blue compared to where you might be unsuccessful in time. So planning forward. Okay, so let me just wrap up. If we consider all these factors that are affecting sagebrush recovery, heterogeneity within burned areas, first of all, we might be able to better plan where we put our treatments, where we make our investments. But to me, even more importantly, we might get a fairer assessment of success. If you can rationalize where you might be more likely to see sagebrush come up, then you can maybe focus your evaluation of success accordingly. And you can use the kinds of information that we're generating to create these decision support trees that are produce mappable information and give you, the information that you need for planning. Bottom line here is, we're still learning about all these factors affecting patchiness and sagebrush recovery. I wish that we knew all of this 10 or 20 years ago, but here it is, 2021, and we're still making pretty major discoveries on factors that strongly affect the patterning of sagebrush recovery. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. All right, Kirk Davies, if you want to share your screen and introduce yourself.
Okay, hopefully I'm getting there. Let's see. All right, do you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So thanks, Matt. That was a lot of really good information condensed down into one nice presentation. So I'm Kirk Davies. I'm the lead rangeland scientist with the USDA Agriculture Research Service in Burns, Oregon. And I'm going to talk about the influence of microsite and grazing on Wyoming big sagebrush seedlings. And unlike Matt's stuff that was at such a large landscape, I'm going to be talking about much smaller plots and treatment areas. Danny Summers did a really good job highlighting that we have a lot of issues with getting sagebrush established, and especially Wyoming big sagebrush that grows in the hotter and drier areas. And that's why a lot of times we end up going with planting sagebrush seedlings. It's a lot more costly and logistically challenging than broadcast seeding Wyoming big sagebrush seed, but the establishment is a lot higher because we can bypass that seedling emergent stage where we lose a lot of seedlings. The cost, of course, is quite a bit greater, but when you look at the number of sagebrush like established per acre, the cost per sagebrush is usually actually pretty similar. The challenge is, of course, that we can't do a lot of this just because of the logistical constraints. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about kind of what we've found from some of our sagebrush seedling studies. Specifically, when to plant and the need to prioritize where we're planting locations within a community. And then after we establish sagebrush seedlings, how do we protect them from fire and encourage their growth and reproductive efforts so that they serve as a seed source for the areas between the sagebrush and also the areas surrounding these plantings. The season of planting has proven really important. We've found through numerous studies, and this isn't an individual study, this is grouping a lot of studies together, that spring and fall plantings can both be successful, but fall plantings are more likely to be successful. About 70% of our fall plantings have been successful versus only about 30% of our spring plantings. And part of that reason is that sagebrush is a evergreen, and so they're growing over that fall and winter when conditions are decent, getting those roots elongated so they can survive that coming summer drought. There are also some challenges with spring planting. A lot of times it's really muddy in these areas and it can be difficult to access the sites we need to plant. We don't usually have that challenge in the fall. I mean, it can be muddy, but not as extreme. But there also can be a situation in the fall where it can be difficult to plant because the soils are dry and it's hard to create holes for the seedlings. But the main takeaway point is that by and large, fall is more successful. We can be successful with spring plantings. Once we decide to plant, one of the most important things we can do is select the sites the microsites where we plant sagebrush seedlings at. In post-fire landscapes, we have these former subcanopy microsites and then interspace microsites. You can see here this black area that used to be a sagebrush spot, so that would be a subcanopy microsite. And then here between the sagebrush, which is gray, or not gray, more tan, is the interspace microsite. When the sagebrush plant burns, it burns a lot hotter, removes a lot of the competition that the sagebrush seedling will experience. However, at times we see some hydrophobicity in here. So we really want to look at the difference between those microsites and compare seedling success. We did this after wildfires in Oregon, and we did it at 5 different ecological sites in southeastern Oregon. And these areas represent about 2 million acres, according to the current range ecological site descriptions. Each one of these microsites at each ecological site, we end up planting 50 different sagebrush seedlings. We planted them in the fall of 2014 and then followed them for the next 4 years. This graph here is just showing you the ones that were planted in the sagebrush former canopy in the black, and then the striped white is the interspace location. The first year after seedling, we're sampling these usually in June. They were fairly similar, but that summer drought coming in here, we started seeing the real difference between the interspace and the canopy location. And by the end of the study, survival in the subcanopy microsite was 7-fold greater than the interspace. And kind of like I already highlighted, most of the seedlings died in that first summer drought. So seedlings that survived to June the first year aren't a very good indication of success. We see in the next couple of years the real success of the sites. A huge difference in terms of success just based on where we planted them. 4 years after planting, that sagebrush canopy cover was 6-fold greater in that microsite area. Those sagebrush in those canopy microsites were also producing more reproductive stems and more seeds. We didn't measure this, we just kind of actually noticed it, but there's a lot more production happening because they had those elevated resources, so those individual sagebrush plants grew a lot larger, a lot faster. So once we establish sagebrush seedlings into a Wyoming big sagebrush community, fire essentially poses the biggest risk to these seedlings. And when we're talking about large landscapes that have been planted with either sagebrush or sagebrush seedlings, grazing is really the only treatment that we can apply to modify fuels between them. Not to say that some kind of strategic fuel breaks around them wouldn't be beneficial, but between those fuel breaks, the only thing that's really feasible to manage that fuel is probably grazing. Now, of course, there's concerns that cattle can trample the seedlings in here and subsequently cause mortality. Cattle don't generally like to consume sagebrush, but they will sample it. So there's concerns that, them being out there, they may inadvertently sample, a small seedling and result in its mortality. So we wanted to look at that. So first off, we looked at, did it reduce fire probability by reducing fuels? And yes, you can see in these graphs, the perennial bunchgrass fuels were greatly reduced with grazing. And then, of course, the annual grass, the one we're really concerned about, when it became fairly significant in 2018, that by grazing, we did reduce that fuel buildup and reduce the likelihood those areas were burned. Most importantly, grazing didn't influence sagebrush survival. Now, normally we're looking for something that creates a positive influence. In this case, we were just happy to see that it did not negatively impact sagebrush survival. Therefore, they weren't trampling them or pulling them out of the ground and killing them. What was really interesting, though, was that sagebrush cover was much greater where grazing had been applied. And that's because grazing was modifying that herbaceous shrub competition by removing some of the photosynthetic tissues of those herbaceous plants, then favoring sagebrush. And we see that in this graph that sagebrush cover was more than twice as great 5 years after planting, and the sagebrush plants were also quite a bit larger. We also saw that grazing significantly encouraged a reproductive effort, and that's just a fact of them being extra resources available to those sagebrush plants, them growing much faster, reaching maturity sooner, and developing reproductive stems. At the end of the study, this is 5 years later, we had almost 30 reproductive stems per plant on those sagebrush plants that came from the grazed plots versus about 15 on the ones that came from the non-grazed. In summary, fall planting was more consistently successful than spring. We could be successful spring planting, and we were at times, especially if we had an elongated, wet spring. But across the board, fall planting was more successful. We found that seedlings should be planted in former canopy microsites. We saw a similar pattern with bitterbrush, but this is with sagebrush, Wyoming big sagebrush. They did a lot better, both growth and survival, if they were planted in a former microsite where the burning of the sagebrush reduced competition, and there was also that fertile island. We also found that grazing can protect that investment. If we're worried about these areas burning, then, and we should be, that grazing can reduce that fire risk. Now, I'm not just saying, any kind of grazing, we want to manage it well so we're not promoting cheatgrass invasion or other exotic annual grasses, but grazing can be very effective at reducing the fuels. Grazing can also be used to accelerate that sagebrush recovery. That can speed up its growth by shifting that competitive relationship to the shrubs in the short term. With that, this is the majority of the literature came from these two pubs from last year, and you can see my co-authors there. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jeannie.
Thank you so much, Kirk. All right, Bryce Richardson, if you would share your screen and introduce yourself. I can't hear you. It doesn't look like you're muted, but I still can't hear you. No, I can see I can read your lips. Oh, I think I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay, I had to ditch the. All right. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Sometimes you have to click on your presentation and then click the share button again in that separate window that pops up. Like the window with all your sharing options will pop up.
Okay.
So you click on that and then click share again. There, yeah, there we go. Great.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to Mike and the organizers for putting this together. I'm Bryce Richardson. I'm a research geneticist with the USDA Forest Service in Moscow, Idaho. And today I'll be giving a talk on our climate smart decision support tool, which is called the Climate Smart Restoration Tool. Let's see if I can get this thing to advance here. There we go. So the CSRT, the premise behind it is that plants are adapted to their local environments. And if you move those plants or the seeds outside of those conditions, it can lead to maladaptation, which in turn makes things less resilient and resistance to climate change and invasives. So the CSRT is a web tool that calculates and maps seed transfer distances from user-selected geographic coordinates. And the CSRT is designed specifically for shrubs, grasses, and forbs. And we have another web tool, the seed lot selection tool, which is designed for forest trees. So the CSRT, kind of the foundation of it is climatic grids. We use a total of 27 annual and seasonal temperature and moisture variables that are based on recent past climate measurements from weather stations. And these climate grids are used for several aspects. One is predicting trait variation, which we call genecological models. They're also used in the species distribution models or climatic niche models. And then we can also update these grids for future climates using the different climate emission scenarios. So the key components for building the climate smart tool is one, contemporary and future climate grids, which I just mentioned. The other part of this is the climate-based trait functions that are from Common Gardens. Or if you don't have those, you can use user-defined climatic constraints. This is analogous to provisional seed zones. And lastly, we use the species distribution models as constraints of those function projections to give a better idea of where the species is going to be, in this case, sagebrush. So I thought I'd kind of go through the steps that or the traits we're using for basin for all big sagebrush. One of them is survival, which is related to cold hardiness. And survival is predicted based on continentality, which is basically mean monthly warmest temperature minus the mean coldest month temperature, and also summer precipitation. And this really was pronounced at our coldest site at Ephraim, where we saw, you can see from the graph below in red, the drop in survival over time from plants at this garden. And the map shows the prediction of that function across the landscape. So places from less continental climates tended to do poorly at this cold site versus areas, populations further east. Our second trait that we used in our function is flowering date. And it is predicted based on photoperiod. In this case, we use the surrogate of latitude as photoperiod and timing of spring. So this is based on the degree days above 5 Celsius, reaching a threshold of 100-degree days. And you can see how both of those help predict flowering date. I got a dog outside. Hold on just a second. Sorry about that. So the other part of this is climate intervals or the confidence intervals, and that's how we use what we use to determine the threshold of transfer distance. And for example, flowering date is about 10 days we use. So the other part of this is the species distribution model. And here we're showing both for sagebrush, we divided this up into 2 subspecies models. One is your lower elevation subspecies, Tridentata and Wyomingensis, which is projected in yellow. And then the Vassiana is projected in purple. And we can also see the overlap between the 2 of these, which kind of defines the ecotone between the 2 subspecies, and that's shown in the brown color. And of course, then we can project these species distribution models out in the future. And these maps just show the projections for a lower emission scenario and a higher emission scenario for both 2030 and mid-century 2060. So a little bit more about the CSRT. There's basically 5 steps users need to take. The first is just to choose the objective, and that is whether or not you have coordinates for a seed collection or a particular restoration site. So you can either select the location on the map or actually enter the coordinates. Then you need to select the climate scenario that you'd like, whether it's just contemporary climate or you would like to see it projected out for a particular decade and emission scenario. And then you select the taxa. In this case, it's going to be sagebrush. And then you select the constraint, the species distribution model. And so what I was going to do is actually show you the website And here you have the objective, the coordinates. I selected the site just southeast of Burns. And this is showing the contemporary climate and where you could collect seeds that would be adapted to that particular site. We also have a distance or similarity function in here. So the sites that are toward the red scale are more similar in climate than sites toward the yellow color, although all those would fit within the threshold of the seed transfer distance. And then to compare, I also have that same site projected out for mid-century. And you can see one is that seed collected at this site will no longer be adapted under mid-century climate conditions. And two, the second point is most of the populations that would support seeding this site for mid-century are threatened by range contraction based on our species distribution model. That is not shown in this particular projection, and that's something that we're currently working on. Okay, go back to the slides. So just a few concluding remarks. The CSRT really illustrates that seed banking or developing seed orchards, especially from trailing edge populations, are going to be critical in the future for having successful restoration, especially our warmer sites. We also need to think about going forward about incrementally moving populations that are from warmer, drier seed sources to cooler areas based on these predictions. And I also would think some bet hedging would be wise, where we actually mix local and warmer adapted populations together. So you have a mixture of different genotypes that can handle both current climates and climates 10, 20 years down the road. One thing that also we see in projecting out further is we need to be thinking about more aggressive seed transfer as we approach the next decade. So some additions that we're currently working on. We just finished up the blue bunch wheatgrass function and is now on the CSRT. We're looking at how to incorporate population genetic data as another constraint in mapping this. We're also trying to link seed inventory data into the CSRT, so a user could map the area they want to and also retrieve seed lot information on areas that would be suitable for their planting site. Currently, this is mainly work going on in the SST with Forest Service seed lot information, but hopefully we can start working on BLM information as well. And the last thing that we're working on is adding a feature in there where you could actually highlight areas in your seed transfer mapping area that are projected to be contracting by mid-century or whatever constraint you want to use. And that would give you an idea of places that would be more desirable to collect seeds, because chances are they're going to be extirpated in the future, but obviously they're going to be important in the long run as some of these climates warm. So just to acknowledge, there's been a lot of people that have worked both on the sagebrush aspect of this and also the tool development. So thank you.
Thank you, Bryce, and your lovely co-presenter. All right, Madsen, if you want to share your screen and introduce yourself.
Okay, hello everyone. It's good to be here. So I'm an assistant professor at Brigham Young University, and I'll be talking about seed enhancement technologies for improving sagebrush seeding success. And to start off, I want to thank a lot of people that make this possible. It's been mentioned how sagebrush is so hard to work with. It's extremely small. And so we have a number of students that have worked really hard to count out sagebrush seeds and get them ready and put them in packets and do all kinds of studies, as well as a lot of good collaborators. And I've just listed a few here, but really appreciated their support. Funding from the state of Utah. We get some from Great Basin Sagebrush Restoration Fund, and then a little from Granite Seed. So just makes this work possible. And I like this quote here out of Gahn et al. It says, given past and current degradation, to sustain ecosystem services and goods essential for human well-being, global society must secure a net gain in the extent and functioning of native ecosystems by investing not only in environmental protection, but also in environmental repair, including ecological restoration. And how so that is here in our neck of the woods, right? Where we have this crazy cheatgrass wildfire cycle going on. Here I'm showing a picture. This is near Paradise Valley. Many of you might know the Martin fire. We have some research plots out there. That fire got started in some cheatgrass and then just blew through not only cheatgrass areas, but really good prime sagebrush steppe, sage-grouse habitat, and left a lot of sites looking like moonscapes. And areas are recovering with grasses and forbs, but the sagebrush, that's one that's going to be not coming back in my lifetime, and probably not my kids' lifetime, unless the site's successfully seeded. And we have areas like this across the Great Basin where they burned in these big mega fires, and they're going to continue to burn. And so we need to be successful. And, considering the scope of where we need to treat, doing it by seed is probably the most economical way. Unfortunately, as has been mentioned previously by some really awesome talks, we're struggling, but we're getting the science now to help us to get better at it. So we're thinking about restoration and ways that we can improve success. And I borrowed this slide from Simon Pedrini. I really like what he put together here. So I'd like to share it. And what I think is really nice about it is it showcases a lot of good work that has been done, over the years. And we can take sites and go out and create a restoration plan and make a seed mix and go out and obtain the plant materials. And Bryce has given us some great information on how to get those plant materials. We can grow those plant materials up and get them ready to go out on the site. And associated with this seed supply chain, we have techniques for cleaning and processing those seeds, testing quality to make sure we're putting out the right kind of seed. We can store those seeds. Danny mentioned the importance of storing sagebrush in cool, dry conditions. And then we can plant them and get them out on the landscape, and hopefully it's green like this picture. But one of the things that I want to say that we should consider adding into our supply chain is seed enhancement technologies. We feel that this is another level of benefit that could be provided to the seed to enhance our restoration efforts. And one of the things that seed enhancement technologies can do is just right off the bat is improve seed delivery. Whether we're drilling or broadcasting, There's a number of species that are a challenge to get to flow appropriately. Sagebrush is one of those, right? Low purity. Here, this handful of sagebrush seed, this almost looks like sawdust, and it can cause, poor flowability, like rat holing here in a broadcast seeder. And then those seeds so small, ballistics are really poor, right? Difficult to spread those seeds over any type of area. And then, just getting them out's a challenge, but then getting them established is even more so. And we think about those seeds we throw out. Most of them are often just broadcast on the soil surface. And we've got seeds sitting on the surface, and that's a tough environment. And in my opinion, it seems like most of the time when we're successful, it's when we have a good snow cover. And that snow will help protect that seed and keep the soil surface moist, moderate temperatures. And, on those good years, that snow recedes and we see little seedlings that are able to come up and able to grow. But, in our climate, especially the lower elevation sites where Wyoming big sagebrush grows, there's often not a lot of snow cover. And when we hit the big fires that, take off all the vegetation, then we get these windswept areas that blows off the little snow that does come in. So yeah, it's a tough little site for that seedling to try to make it and grow. So what could we do to try to enhance that and help those seeds germinate and survive? Well, looking at sagebrush seed germination characteristics, I think we can learn a few things. Here's a study William Richardson did, and he looked at germination timing of various species commonly sown in the sagebrush steppe. And you probably can't read this figure very well, but you can see from the data, one of those species is not like the other one. In particular, if we look here at the 5-degree temperature. So this is showing mean germination time in days. And we see sagebrush under cold conditions takes much longer to germinate than our other species. Now that changes as temperatures warm up. You get out to 25 C, it's actually one of the more faster germinating species. But under cold soils, it's pretty slow. So this might be a reason why, and this builds off of some of the stuff Danny said earlier, but he's shown their group how if we plant in the fall, we end up getting more success than if we're planting later in the winter. Jeff Ott's shown a similar trend as well. Planting in the fall shows more success. And potentially, maybe when we're planting in the fall, the reason our seeding is more successful is that seed is just able to sit in the soil longer with moisture and accumulates enough, we call it hydrothermal time, so those seeds can germinate, meaning the seeds are wet long enough to be able to go through those physiological processes to allow for germination. So what we're trying to do to overcome or enhance establishment of sagebrush is one where we've developed a technique where we conglomerate seeds to just improve delivery of the sagebrush. So the seeds and the non-seed parts are conglomerated together into these pellets, and we can vary the shape and size of these in our rotary seed coaters, but those pellets have enhanced flowability. Here's kind of an example of, we set up a little track. We had different number of bumps as shown on the x-axis, then seeding rates on the y-axis. And the more bumps we had or ran over with untreated seed, the more seed came out, which was because to get that seed to flow, you really had to open up that aperture setting on the broadcast seeder. Versus our conglomerates, we just had to crack it open just barely. And regardless of number of bumps we went over, the rate stayed about the same. And then we can broadcast farther. And if you think about it, if you're broadcasting with, say, a tractor, now you have to have less passes. So there's some savings there. But what could these conglomerates do out in the field? So Rhett Anderson, as part of his master's project, he tested sagebrush conglomerates against untreated seed at 3 sites here in Utah and then a couple sites out on that big Martin fire. And just for the sake of this presentation, we've averaged the weather conditions there at the site. And what we had in the winter was a wetter than average precipitation, and then drier than average through the summer. And here's our results with seedling emergence. We can look here in May when we started counting seedling emergence, and we had upwards of 60% more seedlings emerge up out of that soil that we were able to count. So why is that? Maybe I'll back up here. Shows a photo of some of those seedlings growing up out of the pellets. And one of the things that we think was going on is just that pellet material actually enhances seed soil contact, which may promote it or improve that microsite to allow for seed germination. But as we went through that dry, long summer without a lot of rain, we did see a lot of mortality. In fact, we saw more with the conglomerate than the untreated seed. And we felt like that was kind of something that Gene Shoup described as a seed-seedling conflict. Whereas that pellet was able to promote germination, but maybe the microsite that it was in was not suitable for survival, especially on that dry summer that we had. But in the end, we still had improved success. So upwards of 26%. And considering how low the bar is for sagebrush, we'll count that as a step forward. But what else could we do? One of the things that's nice about these conglomerates is it provides a mechanism to carry or apply other types of ingredients that could help the sagebrush. One of them that we've looked at is putting in or incorporating plant hormones, such as hormones that will promote germination, such as gibberellic acid, or inhibit germination or delay germination, such as abscisic acid, or abbreviated here ABA. So Chelsea did a study in the lab looking at how it's going to affect germination timing. So this is time to 50% of the population to germinate. And again, note under those cold conditions, when she applied some of these GA treatments, our best one, she was able to reduce the time for the seeds to germinate by 10 days. Or if she added ABA in, there was a potential to delay by 20. And so why would we want to delay? Well, sometimes we can't predict the weather. And maybe there might be circumstances like what Danny mentioned, where actually the seedlings emerged and then they had this big frost come through and killed everything. Maybe on that year, maybe a delayed germination might be better. So the thought is if we can spread the germination timing, maybe we could bet hedge or enhance the bet hedging capability of sagebrush to improve their success. So we've tried this in the field, and here's some results from the Martin fire. And we actually didn't see quite what we were hoping for. We have here, black is untreated seed. And note we planted in the fall and then planted in winter. And gray is our conglomerate. And really what we found is that the conglomerate itself, regardless of we added a fungicide or added a plant hormone, they responded about the same. So we didn't see a big improvement. There's some glimmers of hope, like with the fungicide or with this GA treatment, but it didn't work out quite like we wanted to. So why? Well, one of the things that we've found as we've worked with our grasses in particular, if we want a treatment to work like fungicide, we need to keep that on the seed long term, like throughout most of the winter. If that coating breaks down, it just tends to leach away and isn't as effective. But with our sagebrush, we can't make those conglomerates very harder than it actually impacts germination. And so we think the hormones that we were putting in were just leaching out of our conglomerates. So what do we do? Well, started working with the chemistry department here in BYU, and in particular want to highlight Alex Larson. She was one of our best range majors here recently, graduated, and now she's actually getting her degree in chemistry, a PhD nonetheless. So she's extremely bright. And one of the things that she's working on with David Michaelis and I is to see if we could get polymers that are time released. And so we could take these polymers, add them into the coating, and they're going to break down over time and then release the hormone to stimulate germination. And so she's trying all kinds of different polymers, and next year we'll have her present on that. But here's just some preliminary lab data, just showing time and days and germination. And you can see black is our untreated seed. And some aren't helping us much, but some of those technologies she's developing are polymers that are releasing GA. You're seeing faster germination and higher germination for sagebrush. And we think maybe this could be something that could really get those seeds to germinate, especially on those drier years when it might not have the moisture conditions needed.
You got
also,
a minute and a half, Matt.
What was that?
Minute and a half.
Minute and a half, great. Okay, one other thing we're looking at is mycorrhizae. Could we add mycorrhizal spores in the seed coating that could then be beneficial and work with that sagebrush, be right there to help retain and uptake water so that that sagebrush, when it goes through those drought periods, is going to be more likely to survive. Now this has been a challenging task, but Holly's making some headway. Being able to grow spores is not as easy as you might think, but I feel like there's a lot of promise here as well, that we do get this worked out. It'll be a great treatment. So that is my presentation for you today. It's great to talk at RTEC. It's one of my favorite sessions of SRM, and I think it's really enjoyed the talk so far. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. And now Bob Shriver, if you would like to share your screen and introduce yourself.
Awesome. Does that look all right?
Yep, looks great.
Great. I am Bob Shriver. I am an assistant professor at the University of Nevada, Reno. And today I'm going to be talking about some work looking at circumventing environmental and demographic constraints on restoration of sagebrush with planting. And this is some work I started while I was at the USGS. And on the left are all of my co-authors and collaborators on this project. And I have Dave Pike's name highlighted at the top because Dave was really the leader on this project and spearheaded a lot of this work and the publication that resulted from it. And it was funded by the USGS, the Bureau of Land Management, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And as many of the presenters before me have excellently pointed out, that seeding has been one of the most widespread and active interventions to promote recovery of big sagebrush in the Great Basin. And so this map on the right shows all of the areas in the Great Basin that have been seeded with any species over the past 75 years. And many of these are post-fire rehabilitation efforts by the BLM. But in many cases, about half of that area in any given year is also seeded with big sagebrush. So this time series graph on the right shows the total area seeded in the solid line, and then the dark dashed line is the area seeded with big sagebrush seed. And so it's often hundreds of thousands of acres in any given year. And the amount of area has generally been increasing over the past couple of decades because of concerns about the declines of big sagebrush and big sagebrush obligate species like greater sage-grouse. But the outcomes of this seeding have often been variable at best, as Matt Germino pointed out, quite variable. And so this was a retrospective analysis of past seeding efforts that was done by Knudsen et al., revisiting sites on BLM land that had been seeded about 10 to 15 years afterwards. And they compared seeded burned areas with unseeded burned areas, and then also with unburned areas nearby. And so what they found is there's really no difference in total sagebrush cover between the seeded and unseeded areas within the burned region, typically less than 0.5% of sagebrush cover on average. But the amount, the sort of lack of recovery is particularly striking then when you compare it to unburned areas nearby, which had sagebrush cover of about 20%, which is pretty standard for sagebrush steppe across the Great Basin. And so this has led to a lot of questions of why. So what are the factors that control the outcomes of restoration from seeding? And as a lot of the presentations before me have pointed out, that there's a lot of different factors that can control this. So seed sourcing, matching correct genotypes to the environment, the methods that Matt just pointed out, many of the seed balls application methods can be really important, and also community interaction. So competition with perennial bunch grasses or with invasive annual plants that might also be there. But I want to really focus on two mechanisms today, and one is sagebrush life history, and the other one is environmental variability. And so when I say sagebrush life history, I'm basically talking about the development or changes in the survival and reproductive output of individuals as they develop and mature and grow larger, and the implications that has for population recovery. And so what we see is some past work that we did estimated demographic rates of different sagebrush individuals across different size classes. And so these smallest individuals typically have very low survival rates, 1 to 2% in many cases. But as the individuals grow, the survival rates really can pick up. And so if we can get individuals past this initial hurdle, the survival of those established individuals is really high. But the challenge is sort of getting them to that point. And similarly, reproductive output of small individuals is basically none to very little. And so they're not really contributing to population growth. They're dying, but they're not actually giving anything back. So the populations have difficulty recovering initially. And along with that, environmental variability can sort of make this effort harder, because environmental variability tends to affect smallest individuals the most. They have shallow rooting depths. The soil moisture that's available to them is often only really ephemeral sources at the top of the soil profile. And so some other work that we worked on compared environmental conditions in the year after seeding, and found that as a lot of people have pointed out today, that snowpack is really important for trying to understand when sagebrush does become established. And so what we found is the snowpack was much higher on average in locations where sagebrush did occur after the seeding compared to places where it did not occur. And that led to a sort of pulse in spring soil moisture during a really critical time for seedling establishment. But we can't actually control sagebrush life history or environmental variability, but we can take restoration strategies that minimize their impacts on outcomes. And so one of those strategies is planting container grown sagebrush. And so what that does is exactly as Kirk talked about earlier, is it allows you to bypass these early life history stages that are really difficult to get through. And so instead of starting an individual that might, after it germinates, it might have, 1 to 2% survival living through that first year. You can get to a point where you might have, 10 to 15 to 20% survival, and even higher in some cases. And so that allows you to, get those individuals established more reliably. And those larger individuals might also start to begin to produce seed quicker that then could help colonize new areas beyond that. And it can also help us reach habitat goals faster. So if, restoring habitat for greater sage grouse is of concern, planted individuals by their very nature are larger when you plant them. And so they might be able to reach those habitat guidelines faster. But there's also costs associated with planting. There's obviously economic cost, but container grown stock are often grown in a more controlled environment or a greenhouse or conditions basically that don't really match necessarily where they're going to be planted. And that can lead to sort of phenotypic maladaptation during their early development. And it can, the container environment is not the same as being in the field, and it can alter the growth rates. And so there's been some evidence that container grown sagebrush have slower growth rates. And so our goal was to compare the size and growth rates of seeded and planted big sagebrush and answer just a few simple questions. First, do container grown sagebrush have a size advantage over planted sagebrush, and for how long? What are the relative growth rates of seeded and planted sagebrush? And do planted sagebrush actually reach sage grouse habitat guidelines more quickly? And so to do this, we surveyed 133 seeded plots and 91 planted plots on BLM land across the Great Basin at different time points since planting and seeding post-wildfire. And all of these plots didn't necessarily occur in the same locations, but they spanned very similar climate conditions. And so this graph on the right shows the solid line to the average temperature and precipitation in different months. And so the temperatures are basically identical, and the precipitation regimes are pretty similar, except perhaps a little bit wetter for the planted individuals in the winter and drier in the summer. And so what we did is we basically built size models to try to understand how time since fire is influenced, or how whether an individual is seeded or planted, and time since fired influences the size, and then use that to calculate linear growth rates. And so how much did growth differ between seeded and planted individuals at a given site, or based on climate conditions. And so what we found overall is if you sort of take the years since seeding or planting and compare across all of the individuals, given a sort of average climate condition, planted individuals are larger in canopy area for about 4 to 6 years. And so the y-axis here is canopy, the square root of canopy area, to help linearize this relationship. And so it took about 4 to 6 years for the seeded individuals to catch up with the planted individuals. Similarly, when we looked at height, it was about 4 years for the seeded individuals to catch up to the heights on average of the planted individuals. But you also notice there's quite a bit of variability among individuals. So each one of these points represents a different individual that was measured. We can then break that down into the actual growth rates. And again, looking at canopy area, we use the square root of the canopy area. So we're again looking at centimeters per year. And what we found is that in canopy area growth, planted individuals were about 2 centimeters per year slower in growth. And when we looked at height, the difference was even larger. It was about 4 to 5 centimeters slower on average per height growth per year for planted individuals. So the seeded individuals are growing quite a bit faster once they get established. But again, this is sort of taking into account those individuals surviving up until this point. And so then we can also introduce sagebrush habitat guidelines into this and think about different guidelines. And so the guidelines that we used was a 15% cover of canopy area and a 30 centimeter height, and then calculated how long it would take seeded and planted individuals to reach that. And so for 15% canopy cover, we assumed that there'd be about 2 individuals per meter squared. And if you, with that assumption, it takes planted individuals about 3 to 4 years to reach the canopy cover guidelines, and at seeded individuals, it's about a year or 2 later, so 4 to 5 years. Similarly with height, it takes planted individuals about 2 to 3 years to reach that 30 centimeter height threshold on average, while seeded individuals, it takes 3 to 4 years typically on average. So you get about a year or 2, you get to those sagebrush habitat guidelines about a year or 2 faster with the planted individuals than you do with the seeded. And so just a few takeaways from this work. First, as I showed earlier, the planted individuals typically do reach the sagebrush guidelines faster on average, about a year or 2 faster. However, there are faster growth rates in the seeded individuals, and that typically allows them to catch up pretty quickly. But again, that assumes they survive. And so the likelihood that any individual that's seeded survives up until the point that they're 30 centimeters in height is much lower than a planted individual. And in the paper, we sort of advocate for strategically creating patches of planted individuals in a landscape surrounded by seeded areas. And this may help accelerate sagebrush and sage grouse habitat recovery. So what that basically does is it creates a core habitat for sage grouse and for recovery with planted individuals where we know establishment is going to be much more reliable. And then a landscape around that can be seeded, and those individuals may not establish at the same rates, but some of them may. And then hopefully those planted individuals get to a point where they're reproducing pretty quickly, and they can also act as a seed source to then begin to expand the population from there. And just a few big picture considerations from this. First, size and growth is really just one part of the sagebrush one part of sagebrush restoration. And a lot of the biggest payoffs, which we didn't really look at here, are through the survival of planted individuals. And so survival rates of planted individuals have been estimated anywhere from 15 to 80% over like a 1 to 3 year period. And so that's substantially higher than what we would see from any seed that we put out on the landscape. The probability of any given seed turning into a surviving individual is quite low. And so there's a big efficacy sort of advantage with planting. And while planting sagebrush is more expensive per hectare, as I said, the efficacy is much, much higher. And so once you sort of, if our goal is not necessarily to treat large numbers of area, but actually sort of effectively treat large numbers of areas, the costs really become comparable. So the costs of planting big sagebrush and successfully restoring it across a hectare has been estimated anywhere from $285 to $627 per hectare. And as a comparison to that, Boyd and Davies estimated, at least for perennial bunch grasses, the cost of successfully seeding an area or a hectare is about $250 to $700 per hectare. And so we might expect with big sagebrush that cost would be even higher because of all the challenges that have been talked about today, that the establishment is much, much lower. And so when it comes down to it, if our goal is to sort of effectively treat areas, planting may be just as a cost-effective strategy as seeding has been. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Bob. And thanks to all the presenters. Mike, did you want to jump in and say anything before we jump into questions?
Nothing other than thanks again to all the presenters. Those were some excellent presentations. We were really wanting to look at some of the new ways of being more successful with seeding sagebrush, and I think we've got a lot of options to look at. So thanks to the speakers, and yeah, let's get into questions. And then at the end, again, we'll go into a short RTEC discussion about next year's meeting and topic.
Sounds great. All right, if all the presenters could turn their cameras on, and we'll just go in the order that questions were asked. And some of the questions were asked in the, answered in the chat, but I don't know if everyone is able to see them, so we'll just go through those as well. The first one was for Matt. Matt, how do you identify fertile islands?
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, you've got my video blocked on your end, which maybe is desirable.
Here, I'll ask you to start video there.
Okay. So yeah, fertile islands are easy to identify just after a fire. They're dark. Rangeland soils typically are very light in color owing to the scarcity of organic matter. Organic content is typically one of the only things that gives a dark, like blackish color to soils. So that's the coarse scale thing. You can look for the dark patches before the grasses come up and occlude the soil surfaces. And then you can look a little closer and you can usually see soil textural differences, and particularly the actual organic fragments that are in the hotspot. And then, of course, the surest indicator is either the presence of a partially burned trunk or main stem, or sometimes if it's burned hot enough, there'll be a hole in the ground. Other times you can also see where there's a ring where herbs, including remnant bunchgrass meristems, are absent. Those can also be clues to where the fertile microsites existed. Once the herbs come up, it can be very difficult to see where those microsites were.
Great, thanks. The next question is directed to Kirk. Oh, actually, I asked this question. What type amount of grazing was applied and what would be the recommendation? And then someone else followed up, and also the season of grazing.
Yeah, so in this study, we were really wanting to push it a little bit and see, make sure that cattle weren't negatively impacting sagebrush seedlings. So we grazed every year in the spring, which is not what I would recommend in a normal rangeland management scenario. And we were grazing, I think, 40 to 50% utilization. I would think, though, the more proper grazing would be try to defer it, every other year, but also focus in on years you were concerned either about sagebrush survival, or more likely there was a buildup of fuel from the prior year. So we were concerned about that added fuel creating a fire in there.
Great, thanks. The next question is also for you. What size age plants were used? Any recommendations for sagebrush grow out, e.g. pot size, age, hardening off, etc.?
Yeah, so we grow them ourselves usually, and they're usually 4 to 6 months old, without jumping back to that period, because we do a lot of sagebrush seedlings that we grow out. We usually use cone containers that are about 21 inches deep, and then our seedlings are anywhere from 7 to 15 centimeters tall. And we do always harden them off. There's really good, mentioning in that deal that sometimes they're not adapt to these sites, and we want them to be as adapted as possible. So we usually start hardening them by taking them outside, expose them to the weather as well as decreasing the water they get about a month before they go out on the ground. So that's really important. I can't stress that enough, that you don't want to take them directly from a greenhouse or a grow room and plant them. They need to be adapted to the elements. And we usually start that off by, a couple hours a day, working up to being outside, most of the day.
Great, thank you. The next question was also answered maybe in the chat. It was, what do you think is the evolutionary benefit? And I don't know who this is directed to, but the evolutionary benefit of the sagebrush seed being so small. And someone suggested that it was a resource trade-off. So small seeds, you can have more of them. But would someone like to comment on that?
My thought is that it's a bed hedging strategy. You can bed hedge through time and you can bed hedge through space. And so if you produce lots of seeds, it can go lots of places, then it increases the likelihood that it finds a good place.
Makes sense. All right, if there are no other comments on that one, Matt, this next question is for you. Getting the seeds to germinate during a dry year is one thing. How do you get them to survive the dry years after that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's a few different strategies. I don't know that we're successful at it yet, but I think stimulating growth, especially root growth during that early period when moisture is available in the spring, could potentially, allow that plant to chase the drying front and give it a better chance of survival. So, we're looking at different stimulants, fertilizers, things that we could add. I think biologicals have a lot of promise too. I mentioned mycorrhizae. In the ag sector, there's a lot of work with various biologicals and bacteria that can be added in with the seed that can help improve their tolerance. And then I guess go back other enhancements that you could add. There's some recent studies like things like salicylic acid can stimulate plants to help them be more drought resistant. So I think there's options that could be added there.
Great, sounds like more research to be done.
Yeah, always.
Yeah. Matt, this next question is also for you. How does the cost for sagebrush seed conglomerates compare to something like seedling planting?
Yeah, another good question. So we've run the numbers and we're buying material at small scale. So I think we could drop this quite a bit. Some of our ingredients were pretty expensive when we bought it, but I mentioned Rhett's study in the conglomerates, and he estimated that he's increasing the cost of the seed by about 19%. But he also demonstrated where he has more seedlings growing, that on a per plant basis, you actually save money quite a bit, depending on your success rates. So a little bit of money up front, but if you think of it on the cost per plant on the landscape and we've talked about this earlier, that's where the cost savings can be.
Great, thank you. And what does the commercial market look like for conglomerate availability?
That's what we need to get going. Huh? We've got a few people we've been talking with that do seed coating, especially up in the Boise area, and they have interest in coating seeds for rangeland efforts. I think they can see there's a potential market up there. So it wouldn't be hard to take seeds, say, from the Boise warehouse and run them down to a commercial seed coating facility and then throw them on the fire.
Great. Has anyone looked at, I think this is to anyone, has anyone looked at how well things like seeding at the wrong time, seeding low rates of pounds per acre, and seeding right into cheatgrass stands, how well things like that predict the high rate of failure reported? Like, are those things part of most failures?
Yeah, I can address some of that. So generally, most people's observation is that seeding into cheatgrass stands is not advisable and actually does lead to, in the long run, to failure. I found it kind of surprising though that when we got on our hands and knees and looked at the actual germination and initial establishment, that it was a heck of a lot greater than the literature would lead us to believe. But probably there's some competition that happens post initial establishment where the sagebrush are knocked out by the cheatgrass. And then of course, when that cheatgrass stand reburns, you've lost it all, right? So the fire reburning is the trump card, if you will. But you know, that's one of the major factors. Seeding at the wrong time, you know, seeding timing is a really tricky thing from what I've learned from our BLM colleagues. There's so many factors that go into when the actual seeding occurs, and they're usually operational things that deal with contracting, weather, availability of equipment, getting, you know, now most of the seeding goes on in these huge megafire areas, and so the size of projects are just huge. I mean, they have to sometimes collect and bring in tractor trailers full of sagebrush seed. And so, you know, they're lucky to get the seed out. Usually the managers are feeling pretty good if they can just get the seed out, let alone get the timing done precisely either before or after snowfall. That's my observation. I know that varies by BLM district and by different state offices. Seeding low rates. I think Danny made a great case that, you know, experimentally, that seeding low rates probably has an effect. He could talk more about that. And, you know, people like Chad Boyd have experimented with what they called heap seeding, or no, was it heap piles, where they would put super high densities of seeds in small areas like patches. And they found that, I'm pretty sure they found that generally tended to be pretty yielding for resulting outplants or resulting seedlings. Like it actually was successful. Others could comment more.
Great, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, this is Mike. I might just add one thing from an operational standpoint, that timing of the seeding, especially in BLM. In the fall, there's a lot of rangeland drill seeding going on, the contracting. There's limited resources operationally to get all of that done. And if you add that, if you're going to aerial seed sagebrush in the fall before winter, that just puts a bigger demand on an already kind of limited workforce. So I think it works out well if you can do your drill seeding in the fall and aerial apply sagebrush in the winter. And I think we've kind of got into that, not only because, well, that's the way to do it, but also it fits operationally within, you know, the workload. So I think that's another challenge we're going to have to work through, is that, you know, the limited resources in terms of supervising contracts and applying seed as well. So just throw that out for thought as well.
One thing that I didn't talk about on soda, which was a major lesson, the BLM managers experimented with layering different treatments. And I was really impressed at how well drill seeding in like year 2 on top of sagebrush seedlings that came up from seed put down in year 1 worked. I think Kirk was saying that, you know, a little bit of worry with like cattle damaging sagebrush seedlings that have emerged. Well, we found similarly that that active treatments imposed upon sagebrush that had already established did not appear to obliterate those sagebrush seedlings. And so why this is important? Well, it buys some time. It means that the time frame for intervention can be extended so that, you know, in some cases you might not need to have to shoehorn all these treatments into a narrow few months, and that it's possible that there could be a little bit more flexibility in when treatments are applied. And on the same token, there was a lot of areas that were first treated with herbicides to prep the seedbed and then drill seeded in the second year. And sometimes we can be pretty lucky with, and if we're careful with how seeding of sagebrush is dovetailed with the herbicide applications that are now pretty common with drill seedings. So we need more data and more work in this area, I think.
I'd just say about the logistics there here in Utah with the terrain we have, we're doing less drill seeding with the large fires we have. They're usually in pinyon juniper landscapes, and so we're doing a lot of aerial seeding, and so combining what used to be 2 flights into 1 is kind of what's going on, as long as we can have the material on hand in the fall, and that's it's a mind shift for all of these practitioners to do it differently now.
Great, thank you all. Next question, Robert, why do you think containerized plants have slower growth rates in the long run compared to seeded sagebrush?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the short answer is we don't really know, but we hypothesize that it might have something to do with root development during the containers that has long-lasting impacts on growth rates. Could be just general transplant shock in the short term, but we don't know is like what those growth rates look like, 10 years out, 20 years out. It could sort of, they could reach a sort of steady, constant growth rate. So yeah.
Great, thank you. And last question so far, at least. Danny, did your experiments with timing and seeding rates address seeding areas with cheatgrass?
No, we were trying, after some of our failed experiments of trying to seed into cheatgrass and other places, we really tried to control our environment as much as possible, control all the variables. So we were doing it on bare soil on a farm, which when you let it fallow with just a few sagebrush seedlings, we do end up with a bunch of annual kochia and things competing with the sagebrush. But our experiments were more directly just trying to get direct, see how the sagebrush seed would respond and timing, and try to control as many variables as we could.
Great, thank you. Oh, another question came through. Robert, any thought to spatial models? Sounds like fertile islands around shrubs may have higher growth rates, which may have implications for aggregation and spread of individuals across the landscape.
Yeah, that's a good question, or a good thought. I think I don't have the data on dispersal and dispersal distances and what the sort of traveling across the landscape look like, but I know there are people working on that. I know Matt Germino is involved in a little bit of that, and Trevor Coughlin at Boise State is looking at some of those, but I don't have that exact information. But surely there would be, those fertile islands nearby would be prime places for seeding of individuals from the fertile islands to spread out to.
Great, thanks. Since that's the last question, Mike, I hope you don't mind. I just thought of this. I was on a meeting earlier today, and someone asked if this community got a giant pocket of money right now, what's the first thing that needs to be done for restoration of sagebrush systems? Is it removing wild horses? Is it removing barriers so that people can seed in the fall, getting more equipment? And so I thought, I don't know if you don't mind, would it be fine to ask all the presenters what they think the number one thing is?
Sure, you bet, go for it.
All right, can we start with you?
Yeah, I'll take the safe bet and just say all of the above. I mean, obviously there's a number of bottlenecks. The thing I'm encouraged about is we started aerial seeding. I started in Boise District in 1981, and we heard about a seeding that was done in Burley, fairly high elevation aerial seeding, and it worked great. And so that was part of the impetus, at least in Idaho at that time, for why I went with aerial seeding. And then again, it worked out really well operationally for the operations people to have that work in the winter. But I think what we're seeing is, with the research that's being done now, we have a lot of opportunities from, when we seed, how much we seed, conglomerates, everything. So I think we're whittling away at that bottleneck, which I think is obviously from the sagebrush restoration is getting the sagebrush growing. You know, dealing with wild horses and a lot of other issues. Yeah, we've got to deal with them, but if we can't get the sagebrush going, why are we worrying about, you know, some of the other issues relative to habitat restoration? So I'm just encouraged that we've got the science and it's moving forward. We got a venue like the Great Basin Fire Science Exchange to get that information out, and I think we're going to be more successful. I'll just leave it at that.
Great, thanks. I'll ask you all in the order that I can see you on my screen. So Danny Summers, you're up next.
That's a hard one. That's pretty easy to just say all the above because there are so many limiting factors there. You know, continuing to change the mindset of practitioners and the need for sagebrush on the landscape is a big one. But I think we're getting there, and I think we're heading in the right direction. You know, I guess, you know, there's been a lot of research that has shown how difficult and how much we've failed over the past decades. But I think it shouldn't be like, well, we should give up because it fails. I think we can, with all of the things that are going on, just continue to move forward. And I think we can improve the situation and find ways to find success.
Great, thanks. Bob Shriver.
Sure, yeah, I think if I was to try to focus resources and attention on one thing, it'd be to try to think about how to make policy and implementation more adaptive. So as I think all these talks have pointed out, that like variability is big, but we also know a lot about certain strategies work better, you know, in high resistance and resilience places, and seeding might work great there, whereas planting might be better in low resistance places. And so, and same with the timing of the seeding. And so coming up with ways to sort of work and think about how we can be more adaptive to the variability out there, I think could have big payoffs.
Great, thanks. Matt Germino.
Well, I would take a look at what works so well in our human medical system. Like we fixed a lot of major problems. We wouldn't be here, for example, if it weren't for like vaccination technology, right? I mean, that along with the moderation of our climate has led to the explosion of humans on Earth, right? And the magnificent, I guess, things that have happened with our culture. Okay, so how is it that the medical system works? They have a very good coupling of basic understanding of processes and medical practitioners. Okay, we don't really have that kind of connection as strongly here in, especially in sagebrush steppe ecosystems, where we're, in my opinion, we just don't understand them quite like we do like forest systems, for example. There's just a lot of uncertainty. And so my solution to that, Jeanne, is to make a more formal, concerted effort to create not projects, but programs that are all about adaptive management, where we have a formal and dedicated active learning system that supports the management. And I think it's critical because, I mean, let's face it, I mean, it's going to be a long time before we really understand enough general science and how the general ideas apply to each one of these unique patches of ground that we deal with. Patches of ground being like megafires, you know, 100,000 acres. This one's so different than that one. So that's the general need that I would like. And the thing that's required for this that might cost a little bit of money in terms of like policy and things is let's get rid of all the sideboards and the policy and budgetary restrictions that our managers and research are encumbered with. If the manager knew that, you know, at the end of the day, they've got, you know, within 5 to 10 years, they want to try to get a plant community going in the right direction. And maybe that means bringing sagebrush back, and that they're going to have this amount of resources, a package of resources. They can then bank those resources and apply them smartly much like you would a wad of cash going into, a gambling room. You want to like hedge your bets, meter things out, right? If you really need to win, you're not just going to throw the load on the gambling table and hope that you're lucky with that first toss of the dice. No, instead what you would do is you would meter things out, and a smart person would make educated guesses, and they would try to learn along the way. So I'm talking about like a learning system, adaptive management, banking the resources so that they can be applied for retreatment opportunities, or performing serial treatments to get each one of the components of the plant community right, so that at the end of the day, you've got a stand of sagebrush that's surrounded by fire protected vegetation, so less likely to burn, for example. That's what I would really hope for. It would cost a little bit of money, but the real time and effort would be everything that's required to change the policy and the programmatic structure that surrounds us.
Great, thanks. That's funny. So I can hear now, we should wish to hear little kids say, I want to be a doctor when I grow up, of rangeland health.
Dr. Sagebrush.
Yes. All right, Matt Madsen.
Okay. Oh, what is my response to this? That's a good one. I was kind of thinking about maybe Danny and Matt's, both of what they've said and how we are making progress. And Mike has mentioned that as well. And I have teenagers, and it's made me hate cell phones. But also I look at my cell phone, and it's pretty amazing all that it can do. And, to create that, it's taken a lot of interdisciplinary work, a lot of focus to be able to create what we have, that technology. And I see us moving in that direction, and a lot of our talks, it's associated with a lot of interdisciplinary work that's been going on, and to make where the progress we've made. And I think just that continued focus, bringing in various fields to come in and try to combat the problem, I think could take us a long way.
Great, thanks. Kirk. Davies.
Well, the advantage of going last is you can just say that you agree with everyone else's spots on what they talked about. But the one thing I'd like to add to theirs, so I'll keep this kind of short, but if we can't really get a handle on the annual grass problem and the associated increase in fire frequency, we're not going to be able to restore sagebrush at the scale and scope we need to. We're losing, or actually transitioning to true annual grasslands at about 500,000 acres per year. So that's kind of where I see a huge area for improvement, is somehow getting a better control on that annual grass fire cycle. And then all this stuff we've talked about can be put to work to restore sagebrush to these communities.
Thanks. Bryce Richardson.
Yeah, I'll just plug one of the comments I made during my presentation, and that's, we really need to start thinking about seed banking, creating seed orchards of some of these remnant populations along the warm, dry edge of sagebrush, because they're going to be absolutely necessary in 10 to 15 years, and we might not have a lot of them left. I know there has been some effort underway in the BLM to actually create some of those. I'm not sure where they're at, and there's probably people that are listening that probably know more than me, but I think that was a good step in that direction. And it would help, with seed supply in the long run.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I appreciated hearing about that, and I'll pass that up to the people who asked in the meeting earlier. So Mike, looks like we have about 20 minutes left. Two questions, additional questions came in, one for Danny and one for Bryce, but I wonder, with 20 minutes, do you want to go ahead and start talking about the Albuquerque thing? And
No, let's finish the questions and we'll move on then. So
okay,
and get off if they don't want to talk about the meeting.
Okay, great. Danny, can you address the issue of storage of sagebrush? If harvest of sagebrush occurs at the time when it needs to be seeded, how do practitioners need to adjust?
Yeah, well, I mentioned this a little bit, I think, in my talk, is kind have to be planning a year in advance and having seed stored on for a year at least. And so that brings a lot of logistical problems of understanding how to store it, keep it viable. And usually, what we do know is cooling and drying it helps, but there could be more to learn there. And then having the right sources on hand is also a difficult thing to do. And so being able to hedge your bet and have a warehouse full of various sources is one thing to do. But that's going to take some work and understanding where you can and can't transfer. But it creates logistical problems for sure.
Thanks. And Bryce, Central Washington BLM, we just had major fires and collected cleaned broadcast seed here in December. But your slide shows a drastic loss of Artemida tridentata here in the next 40 years. Should our strategy post-fire consider shifting to other steppe species?
Yeah, I was just responding to that. Yes, the niche models certainly show quite a bit of susceptibility in that region. And what I would say is, if you're in areas that are already overrun with invasives, I would really consider whether it's worth the effort to reseed those. And we need to be thinking about what kind of species are going to fill, native species that might fill those niches in the future. And I really think we need to start looking at ecotonal, warm desert, cold desert ecotone species. It might suit that type of environment.
Thank you.
Hey, Janine, this is Mike. Can I just one quick comment on that? I've kind of thrown out a few times in the past that maybe we need to be looking at genetic manipulation on Wyoming big sagebrush so that we try to get a resprouting Wyoming big sagebrush. And I'm not sure. I mean, there's obviously a lot of issues with that, but on the other hand, if we want to maintain that structure and function, that may be one of the options in these highly, cheatgrass infested and wildfire prone areas that potentially might allow at least to keep some sagebrush on the landscape. So not so much for discussion, but just for food for thought moving into the future.
I'll quickly respond to that because that's been brought up to me a number of years ago. And I know Durant MacArthur had been considering looking at maybe producing a hybrid between silver sagebrush and basin big sagebrush that had some sort of resprouting capabilities. And the back of my mind, I've always wondered, why hasn't evolution pushed sagebrush in that direction in the first place? And I think there's some serious trade-offs and probably some vulnerability in having roots that resprout, and probably some fitness costs associated with that. And that's always kind of deterred me from going down that path. But certainly, in places where you have more resource rich areas, ditches, sides of roads where you get runoff, such a thing might work out. But I think across the landscape, as we've been discussing with the heterogeneity, I think it has limited use.
Yeah, thanks, Bryce.
We had a comment. We have Artemisia tripartita that may resprout under the right conditions, but not much. But thank you all for the responses. So Mike, you want to talk about the meeting now, the Albuquerque meeting?
Yeah, let's, again, before everybody leaves, want to thank everybody that came into the meeting. And I think it was an excellent overview of some new directions to go, some potential for the future. And I really thank the presenters. It was just outstanding. And again, an outstanding RTEC workshop. So those of you that would like, please hang on. We'll talk about the Albuquerque meeting and maybe just close again with what Corey said. She put her email address, so any photos or anybody that might want to help write some of the sections or revise them for the revegetation catalog, please help with that as well. Okay, let's, yeah, we're down to 74. I can't believe there's that many that are interested in the next year's meeting, but I'm happy to hear that. So let me just kind of frame, each year we generally just talk about what we're going to do the next year, get some ideas. That's where this topic on sagebrush restoration came out of the Denver meeting last year. The meeting is in Albuquerque, and hopefully it'll be in person. Well, the one thing I will say, we generally try to tailor the topic of the meeting somewhat with the area we're going to have it, just so that we might be able to draw more local people in. So obviously Albuquerque with, you know, it's a lot different environment than the Great Basin. And so if the topic was somewhat oriented to issues in that area, if it's an in-person meeting, it might help to draw in participation. It may not be in person. And if that's the case, then the topic, it could be a little more far ranging. But I know in New Mexico, they've got a program called Restore New Mexico. It's a interagency group working on trying to do something about the shrub encroachment and increasing the diversity of the understory. And I suspect it's probably going to be a topic at the meeting anyway, since it's in Albuquerque, but I just throw that out as if we want to kind of follow the model of getting something that might be of interest to local, kind of in that area. If we could focus on equipment or strategies to reduce shrubs, what are they learning, and increasing diversity. But I'll just throw that out and just open it up to anybody else that would like to contribute some ideas.
Mike, should I tell people that they can open their mic?
Oh yeah, open the mic and they can open the video. I mean,
yeah, if you have comments, please go ahead and open your mic. And we can discuss.
Don't everybody talk at once. Well, that was easy.
Mike?
Yeah, go ahead.
Have you ever done an RTEC on measurement technologies?
No, we haven't, and I mean it kind of fits within some of the categories, obviously, that we focus on. So that would be a thought as well, Matt. Yeah.
I mean, monitoring and measuring. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, back in the day, the emphasis was on just getting the treatment in, and now there's a big emphasis on seeing what our treatments are actually doing. So, like, how can we know? And, technology's come a long way.
Yeah.
Just a thought for you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Matt. Let's make sure we capture that. Anything else? Well, I'm waiting. I'm also going to just say I've kind of taken on the, the lead, if you will, in organizing the workshop over the past few years. And I'm probably going to be able to help through now. And if the year after next, it's in Boise. So really would like to kind of see a structure or a committee or even an individual or something that can kind of take the lead moving forward after the Boise meeting for sure. And even now I'd be willing to help, but just kind of throw that out for food for thought as well. I know Steve Monson's had some ideas in the past about some potential committee and some membership. And I think he had some good ideas in terms of some of the people he mentioned, but to me, it's just really important that RTEC continues because of the history, but also because of, I think, the benefits that it brings to managers, to restorationists to whoever that's trying to manipulate or improve degraded land. So we'll kind of be working on that between now and New Mexico as well, by doing some reaching out, see if we can't get a kind of a committee put together and kind of take that leadership role, moving forward after the next year or two for sure.
Yeah, Mike, along those lines, I think a lot of us might need to be reminded who is on past committees, and then open it up to people here. Like if you want to, I don't know if you want to put your email in the chat or somehow, ask the people that are here now, if anyone wants to participate on that committee, to let you know.
Yeah, and I've talked to some of the individuals that are on here, and some of them Steve had identified, and I think it's just time to make it a little broader group and kind of take it over. That used to work as a committee, and with some retirements of some of the key players and loss of some, it's don't want to see it end. So yes, please. And I had my email just M.Pellant@blm.gov. So if you are interested, reach out. We'll be doing some outreach as well. And yeah, so. But anyway, maybe what we'll do, we don't have to make a decision on the topic. I'll do some outreach, and I'll get a hold of New Mexico and just see what they're planning, if there's something that we could tie into to fill a niche there. It's not just for New Mexico, but maybe some of the southwestern US. We tend to be Great Basin centric sometimes, and we want to make sure we're broader than that as well. So all of the speakers today, I'll reach out to you. Anybody else that wants to send their name, please do. And then we'll kind of do this through email and figure out a topic and kind of go from there, if that's all right with everyone.
Sounds like a good way to proceed.
Okay, if no last thoughts, really want to thank Janie and Corey for helping us with Great Basin Fire Science Exchange. Also forgot to mention that the Great Basin Society for Ecological Restoration was a co-sponsor of this as well. So thanks to that society for being on board with RTEC this year as well. And hope to see you all in person next year in New Mexico. So take care.
Thanks all.